Okay, good evening, everybody. We are here with Real Talk number 6, Restorative Justice and Post-Trial Relief. I'm Hilary Bendick from Grassroots Justice of South Hills, and I have Elaine France from Mount Lebanon Organization for Racial Equity. And we have 3 panelists here tonight. We have Hilary Wheatley Taylor, candidate for magistrate in Dormont, Mount Lebanon, Zeke Rediker, candidate for Court of Common Pleas of Allegheny County, and Richard Garland, an associate professor at the University of Pittsburgh. So I am going to let them tell you a little bit about themselves with a little more detail before we start this great discussion we have planned for tonight. So Hilary, I'll start with you since you are up in the top left corner.
Okay. I'm Hilary Wheatley Taylor, and I am a unabashed progressive Democrat running for magistrate in Mount Lebanon and Dormont. I have spent my entire nearly 19-year legal career in the courtrooms of the Commonwealth and federal courts of Pennsylvania, and have come to see that our magistrates play a very important, although often overlooked, role in justice in the Commonwealth, both from a civil side and of course in the criminal justice system. So I'm excited to talk about this issue in the courts tonight.
All right, Richard, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do in the community?
I'm Richard Garland, and I'm an assistant professor of public health practice at the University of Pittsburgh Graduate School of Public Health. I actually run their violence prevention project, where I coordinate 3 projects right now. One is called GRIPS, Gunshot Recurring Injury Prevention Services, where I see the gunshot wound victims that come into the 4 major trauma units. And based on services that they need, I have a good connection with Allegheny County to get folks services. Other project is I review the homicides in Allegheny County, looking at the trends. Both the homicides and the GRIPS kind of go together, because if I can stop the next shooting, I can stop the next homicide. And then I just started a reentry program working with men and women returning citizens from the state and federal institutions, where we're doing a pre-apprenticeship readiness training. And I have a bunch of other partners where we're working with men and women. I believe that we can change this narrative through opportunities. So when we start talking about restorative justice, the different groups I'm working with, and I have to mention the Eleanor Benyu think tank at the Duquesne University, where it's made up of, it really started in Western Penitentiary with some of the lifers there. And we have one of those lifers that has come home already, Farouk Robert Wideman. He was my math teacher when I was in the penitentiary.
Wow.
Yes.
And I said I'd hold this up, so I was the one that wanted to hold it up. But this is the book that they wrote about restorative justice, in within Westerns. So I recommend.
Great. All right, and Zeke, why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah, I'm from right here in the city of Pittsburgh, grew up in Squirrel Hill, was bused to my elementary school out in East Hills, which was one of the first schools to help integrate Pittsburgh public in the wake of the civil rights movement. After that, Frick Middle School and Taylor Alderdice High School. And I was, I tell people one of the big reasons why I'm running for office is that I saw a lot of my friends take very different paths from the one that I was able to take. I was fortunate to go off to college and then grad school and then law school, but I had friends who were not so fortunate. And that's something I've always been trying to understand and work to try to address. So restorative justice is near and dear to my heart. I'm excited to be here with you guys tonight, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you. Well, maybe we should just jump right in. and ask the first question. I think everybody's, or most people have now heard the phrase restorative justice, and there's a sort of common sense meaning to it, right? But I was wondering if both of you could reflect a little bit about, what is restorative justice, and, how does it differ from, the kind of way that we often address, conflicts and crimes, the aftermath of crimes and things like that. You can decide who wants to go first. I'll just say, how about you, Richard?
Of course you would go to me. As I said earlier, one of the ideas behind restorative justice is both the victim and the offender benefit from the sense of accountability created by the program. So I do a lot of work with young people and adults and families. In the past, with that, young people have been involved in gangs. Being able to do mediations sometimes with some of the young people between who might have feuds with different people, being able to come in between them and get them to start thinking the same way, and that violence isn't the way of solving their problems, is another way. And of course, when we do those kind of mediations, it's really to try and hopefully that law enforcement doesn't have to get involved. Unfortunately, many people don't realize the importance of having a judge, who is open to listening to some of the issues that are going on in some of our communities, and hoping that they can come up with a way to resolve some of those issues, and not be really punitive, sometimes by sending somebody to prison if there's something that they can do. So, for both these candidates, they both really hold true to the restorative justice piece that I'm liking. I'm really liking that they look forward to that. So those are the kind of people that we need in the courts.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate you saying that. I think restorative justice is a way, it's actually a formal program, and it's things that courts can do. It's a thing that school systems can do. You see it used a lot in K-12 education, especially. But restorative justice is also a way of thinking about the way that we go about solving problems in our community. I think it's very much both of those things. But the core at both of those things is accountability, like Richard said. So you have the person who's committed the offense, you have the victim, and then you have stakeholders. It really is a stakeholder-based approach. You have people from the community, because in a lot of cases, crimes don't just affect one person, they also affect the community. And you often have a trained mediator, a facilitator, somebody who can sit the different parties down and can be fair, neutral, and can guide the conversation, try to get real justice, a good outcome. And then you also, in many cases, have social service providers. And these are ways that you can give the victim the kind of access to the resources that they need, and in many circumstances also give the person who committed the offense the kind of access to the resources that they need so that they don't commit another offense. The goal of restorative justice is actually to break the cycle and reduce the likelihood that somebody will end up doing something like this again by holding them accountable, not only to the victim, but also to the community.
Yeah, and what I really like about the idea of restorative justice is how we pivot the measure of success from looking at how much we can punish and how much sort of retribution the state can impose upon an offender, and instead we look to see how much harm we have repaired or how much harm we have prevented by ending recidivism. And I think, you know, when we stop looking at the justice system solely as a place for punishment, we can change the outcomes for so many of the participants.
Yeah, and to what extent are restorative justice principles currently used in the courts? I mean, I know it's not a totally new idea, but are there examples of where, you know, it's either informally or formally currently in use?
I think the short answer there, and this is something that Richard could talk about, and I'd love to hear from his experience, but I think the answer is not enough, right? I think that in a lot of courtrooms, judges are very much still caught up in an older model where courts are not necessarily used to rehabilitate. They are used to dole out sentences or punishments, and then people have to serve those punishments, and when they get out, then hopefully they'll get a second chance. But I think courts can be much more than that. Here in Pennsylvania, back in 1995, the state legislature passed a law that encouraged the court system to begin to implement restorative justice practices. So it's, you know, for the last 25 years, we've had, you know, some language and talk about restorative justice. But, you know, one of the big things that I've proposed in running for judge is that we need formal programs, and we need an investment of money into these kinds of programs. We need trained mediators. We need social service providers. We need to create circles of people. And this is a phrase that's used in restorative justice a lot, is the idea of the circle. That people come together, and they come together to solve problems, and they come together to hold people accountable. I think right now, Allegheny County has two things that they're doing to try to further restorative justice, but neither of them exactly are a program. One is called the Community Intensive Supervision Program, and it's designed to reduce the need for youths to be removed from their homes and put into placement, but still to provide close supervision for those youths. And they operate out of community centers. You've got Garfield, you've got the Hill, Homewood, McKeesport, Northside, and Wilkinsburg. And then you've got a school-based probation program that actually works to try to coordinate amongst the families and schools and probation departments. But again, you know, to what extent do courts have formal restorative justice programs? Not that many, if any at all. And something we definitely need to focus on moving forward.
Yeah.
You know,
Good.
I do like the SIS program that you talked about, Zeke. I think they're doing some good things, and that they really trying to even move things to another level when we talk about intensive supervision. You know, some of the young people that they deal with are in need of services because of what's going on at home. We have to pay more attention to the communities that many of these young men and women come from. And I think that's one of the things when we talk about restorative justice, where we start giving the families the support that they need. And I think that judges who, you know, are open to hearing more about what their family situation is and what the housing situation is, leaning more towards those restorative practices needed in order to make the young person go back to a home that is safe and secure. And I think that's really important, that judges be open to seeing how they can help the family, because a lot of times I think that many of the judges can help get the services that not only the young person needs, but what the family needs. I think that's important when we start looking at the whole, not just we look at the whole community.
Yeah, and I think real quick on to follow up on Richard's point on that, I think that the systems need to be in place so that families aren't afraid to be honest about what they need from at home, right? For fear that CYS is going to show up if they admit they haven't had electricity for a week, or their kids are hungry or whatever. You know, the system can't be one in which it punishes families for being honest about what they need in order to, you know, get the kids back on the right track. And I think all too often parents with children involved in the criminal justice system, the juvenile justice system, truancy related matters, probably are terrified of even showing up in court. And so the system needs to address those concerns, I think, for families too.
Yeah, and a lot of this, I love those answers are great. And I was just thinking, like, specifically, is the judge, because, you know, a lot of these things are programs outside of, you know, what the judge does, but very specifically, and you guys have talked, you know, touched on this in all of your answers, but the judge, him or herself, it seems to me like part of what the judge does is like tell the story of what's happening in the conflict, like, you know, tell the story of what our goal is here as a court. Are we trying to fix things? Are we trying to, you know, bring people back together? Are we trying to punish someone? You know, but I was just kind of wondering if, like, to some extent, just like the commitments and the attitude of the judge, as much as the specific tools that they use, might be really important. I don't know if people have thoughts about that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think at a minimum, we can't expect restorative justice to be a routine part of the system if we have judges who think it's some hokey woo-woo, you know, new aged idea. We need open-minded judges who are willing to look beyond the status quo for how we've done things for decades to find different solutions to ongoing problems.
And the other part too, and this goes back to both Hilary and Richard's points, is that a lot of times in criminal justice, the community is forgotten. Mm-hmm. So what happens is, let's say somebody commits a violent crime, that person ends up going to prison, but the victim doesn't have the kind of mental health resources that they need to heal. And the people related to the victim or people who knew the victim, I mean, there's always a ripple effect mm-hmm. from crimes that are committed in the community. There needs to be a lot more attention paid to the community in our court system, and not just strictly the offender, strictly the victim. It actually has to do with the provision of services so that people can heal from these crimes and can move forward from them. Mm-hmm.
There must be a goal of restoring community. You know, I think, yeah, that's excellent. Yeah.
I think, you know, when we talk about all the pressures that are put on judges because of they have to learn the law. There's no question about that. But the other piece that I want judges to do is learn more about the communities and where these folks are coming from. Right. That gives them, I think that gives them an even better understanding of the things that they might need to, how they can assist this person from not ever coming back to prison or getting the family the services that they needed. You know, I think that's why, you know, I think that's really important for the two of you to look mm-hmm. at things like that.
Yeah. And also speaking to that point, you know, I have no doubt we're going to talk a lot about accountability on this call, right? That's one of the main parts of restorative justice. Judges need to be accountable too. They need to be visible in the communities they serve, and they need to be accountable to the communities that they serve. You know, and a big part of that is knowing the communities they serve and paying attention to the communities that they serve.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to know, you know what I think is also important? You know, many times that the police officers are in the courtrooms and they're telling a story about what this person did and how they did it. We need to have programs just as much for the community, but also with law enforcement. And I sat on the mayor's police reform task force. And, you know, just to be clear, you know, I'm not one of the people that's talking about defunding the police. I'm talking about that we need something in this place. We need to teach them more about de-escalation tactics. You know, of course, we need to talk about diversity, and inclusion, those are all the things. And I think that the two of you will have that kind of power when you look at how we can really change the environment of not only the community, but also of law enforcement as well, and how they do things.
So you had mentioned the community, involving the community and supports. I had an issue come up where there was my client was then impacted, and it just seemed that this would be the perfect scenario for restorative justice. Her brother had been arrested for a crime, was forced, had mental health issues that were not treated at the time, was forced to then come live with her by court order because he was forced out of his home. It was a violent crime. As a result, then the ripple effect, because there are no supports put in place, were that she then was affected with custodial action on her part by her husband. It just seems that would be the perfect opportunity for some sort of restorative justice program to be put in place, where there could have been supports from, the mental health aspect for, the original offender, along with some supports put in place for the community, for her family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a story. I know, I think it's Judge McDaniels, the young man, and I'm actually still mentoring him. He was just, he just kept getting violations for parole because he wouldn't show up probation, because he didn't show up for his probation, but he was working 2 jobs. And she did not want to send him to jail because, the community talked about how good he is with kids in the community, and why he couldn't show up, why he couldn't, meet his probation officer all the time, because he was working 2 jobs. And the judge was the one who said, this man is doing everything that he can to support his family. He's not doing anything wrong. Those are the kind of examples that I like, where a judge would even call me to, could I come to help somebody? And I think that judges, once they understand the community and the services that are out in the community, that they can call somebody to help them with a young person or an adult, to get them on the right track. I think that speaks volumes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are the kind of judges we need on the bench, right? But willing to look beyond the list of rules and the list of procedures to the person and what the person's actual life experience is, and ask why, instead of just deciding to punish.
So it seems like the benefits of restorative justice for the person who committed the offense, are sort of obvious, right? Because it's a more sort of merciful, it's like, let's look at the context, let's understand the underlying situation. But I think we have a few questions about the victims and how, because a lot of people don't understand that, like, restorative justice is, can be really successful for victims too. And I think that's kind of an unappreciated part of it.
I was getting ready to say something about the victims. There are a lot of victims that want to see or want to help the person that might have transgressed against them, to get them help, because they realize that they need help, and at the same time that we should get the victim the help and the assistance that he or she needs as well.
In a court process, and maybe Zeke, you can kind of answer this, how would a victim kind of more specifically be involved, and how would that kind of differ from your traditional court process where they might just give a statement in, a sentencing?
Yeah. So let's just, if I can, I'm just hoping to talk briefly about what makes good restorative justice and sort of talk about some of the nuts and bolts of a program. The thing about restorative justice and what makes it so powerful is that it's voluntary. Restorative justice does not work well when you have multiple parties, the victim included, or the person who committed the offense included, who say, I don't want to do this. I am opposed to this. I am hostile to this process. That means that you are going to start off on the wrong foot. It does not work that well when the parties haven't bought into restorative justice. And I think that's an important point to make about these kinds of programs. The victim has to be willing to come forward and participate in these kinds of programs instead of pressing charges or letting the offender actually just be put into the criminal justice system and the normal processes that our courts use. The offender also has to admit to wrongdoing. That's a really important part of restorative justice, is that the person who committed the offense has to actually come clean about all of this in order to move the process forward. It also needs to be a safe process, right? People need to feel like the space, the circle, the group of people that are involved have everyone's best outcomes at heart. And so you mentioned, what does the victim get out of all of this? The victim gets to feel like there's a group of people that are actually working toward a solution that they want to see. And restorative justice works well when victims are vocal about the kind of resolution to the case that they want to see. In some cases, it's restitution. In some cases, it's an apology. In some cases, it's an understanding of why that person did what they did so that they can continue to process these things. In some cases, it's social services, like I mentioned, therapeutic services, mental health counseling services. There's a lot in it for the victim. And there are some cases that are not good for restorative justice. Not every kind of case is good to create a restorative justice model. So somebody who's committed an offense, for example, somebody who has a long history of violent crime, probably is not the best candidate, and doesn't own up to long histories of violent crime, is not the best candidate for restorative justice. Also, intimate partner abuse cases, because sometimes the abuser can manipulate the victim into actually, sort of doing what they want over the course of the process. So, it's a model that can work, especially with juveniles, especially for first-time offenders, but is not universally applicable. And that's, so I just wanted to provide a little bit of context about that.
So I hear this, and just to kind of get into more like very specifics about the process, I kind of equate this in my mind to like in a family law context of, so maybe if other people are listening out here aren't, criminal attorneys or understand the criminal process, like the collaborative law process in family law, if you're familiar with that, Zeke, where, people who are joining the process might sign some sort of agreement to participate in the process. Is that what would occur? Like the victim and the offender would sign possibly like an agreement to both participate in the process and kind of set the ground rules for participation? Does that occur at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Ground rules are extremely important in these kinds of processes. And I think they're especially important when you're dealing with juveniles, because that buy-in is just so crucial to actually get, to sort of get lift off in a program like this.
Okay.
So on another note, though, and I like what you brought up earlier, Zeke. We think about some of the folks that might have been sentenced for a long time. There's a program that I know that the Department of Corrections is doing with victims and offenders, where the victim comes to see the offender, and the offender is actually apologizing for what they caused their family, you know, the tragedy that they caused their family. That is something that is really good when a victim is coming to see an individual, and the individual is saying that they're sorry that they ever did it, or because how young they were when they committed it, the mindset that they were in. Those are things that people don't realize that are going on in the different institutions to try to get the victim to heal as well as the offender. So I think that's important too.
So how do we use this process to, you know, not only let the victim heal, but make the victim feel safe that they're not going to be a victim again? You know, that they're going to be safe from, you know, future crime or harm, you know, from the offender. Like what do we put in place as part of this process, or what can be put in place?
I don't know if we will be talking about a PFA, something similar like that, but it depends on the community that the person lives in, whether they can come back to that community, because there's always stipulations on probation and parole. I mean, just using myself as an example, when I was paroled, I was told that I couldn't go back to Philly. I was paroled here to Pittsburgh. And quiet as it's kept, that was the best thing that happened to me. But there are stipulations that judges can put on folks. But we always talking about trying to get the whole community to heal, not just the person. We want to concentrate on the whole community, because if things are happening in the community, if we can change that narrative, we can change a lot of the mindsets. And when somebody is released, when they see that the community is together, the likelihood of them reoffending goes way down. And if a judge or magistrate can see it from that point of view, the more programs that exist, the less crime that we'll have. You know, and I know I'm not looking through rose-tinted glasses, but that's the way I would love for things to be.
And also, I mean, I think part of the reason Richard is so effective at doing this kind of work is, you know, we always strive in this country, when you talk about a jury trial, to create a jury of your peers, right? That means that these are people that look like you in some cases. They come from the kind of community you come from. They have shared values to you. They have shared experiences to you in many kinds of situations. And I think in these kinds of situations, especially, it's really important to have the right kind of people in place that have that intimate knowledge of the kind of community that the victim comes from and that the person who committed the offense comes from. You know, a deep knowledge of the community, its needs, how it's been harmed in the past, how it was harmed by this offense, and how the healing process can be created with restorative justice is really important. People who actually understand these issues. One of the problems when people go to court, especially communities of color, and they're sitting up in front of a judge who may not look like them, there's a feeling that this person doesn't understand me, and he or she is about to make one of the most consequential decisions that could possibly affect my life. You know, restorative justice kind of takes that and turns it on its head, right? It's a collaborative approach with people who understand the needs of not only the individuals, but the communities involved to try to reach the right outcome.
How do you envision, you know, just to kind of get an idea, you know, of the process, because Zeke, I know you do have it on your platform, you know, Restorative Justice Mediation Program. How would you envision being able to put that into place in the court, since, as you said, it would be voluntary. I mean, victims might, understandably so, be reluctant to buy in. How do you sell that to victims, to be part of this process and put this into effect in the courts as a voluntary program?
The answer, I don't think, is very ambitious. The answer is to start small. I think with these kinds of programs, you have to take them. You have to start small with pilot programs. You have to test them. You have to see who you can bring into these different circles that you're creating. You have to give people training. I mean, normally the way that these programs work best is you have a trained mediator, usually somebody from the community, probably somebody just like Richard, who can facilitate these kinds of discussions. You don't necessarily need a law degree to do that, but I'm really open to the idea of actually training our judges on restorative justice, to actually give them the kind of tools that they would need to lead these kinds of circles. I think not only would it completely change the mindset of judges about kind of the needs of individuals and communities, but it could be a really powerful thing to have somebody who is an elected official in Allegheny County lead these kinds of programs. And so how do you get victim buy-in? It's not an easy question, but ultimately acceptance of responsibility on the part of the person who committed the offense is an important part of that. The right kind of program and the right kind of stakeholders is an important part of that. And honest and real buy-in from the court system, including the judges, is an important part of that.
Zeke, when you mentioned training judges, this sounds an awful lot like what we already do in the civil court system by training attorneys to be arbitrators and mediators. We do it in civil division every day of the week, nearly every business day, all year. We have trained, approved attorneys serving as mediators and arbitrators in housing court and in your average civil dispute. There is no reason to think we couldn't also do that for criminal division experienced attorneys, victim services attorneys, child advocates, in addition to training the judges to understand how impactful these programs can be.
So if we could shift a little bit to offenders, Richard, I know that you have worked with a lot of folks who are coming out of prisons and jails, and can you talk a little bit about how programs like restorative justice and the kind of broader context of services and sort of community engagement that it brings with it, how that can lower recidivism? Just kind of like, as you have so many, I know you have like probably 1,000 examples, but what does that look like? How is it that somebody comes out, what is it that how could their needs be met more effectively, by this kind of system?
So one of the things that I want to be really clear about is you just mentioned that when guys get out, what kind of programs could they go to? So the thing that is most important to me is while they behind those walls, they are supposed to be preparing themselves to come out, to be able to be accepted in this program. Society has to me, and please don't take this the wrong way, but we feel as though that we have to be the ones to fix somebody coming out of prison. It's up to the individual if they really want to change. We need to put the onus on them. Every time I go back into the penitentiary and talk to guys, when everybody's talking about what society owes them, I'm one of the ones that would say, why do they owe you something? What have you done lately? What have you done to change your thoughts on what you're gonna do when you get out? You start when you're there. You don't start the day that you get out. So and society is constantly putting the blame on themselves for men and women returning back. The recidivism rate is so high. That's because we had to make them accountable as well. That was one of the things that helped me. I had to look at myself and how I needed to change if I was going to be able to be successful in society. And fortunately, I've been fortunate that I've had support since I've been here. So I think it's important that society has to stop blaming itself. We have to take responsibility. The men and women behind those walls, they have to take responsibilities in order to change. So, when we talk restorative justice, we're talking about giving everybody all these things, and they're not taking advantage of them. And I tell the men and women that I'm working with now that I'm not going to work no harder on them than they're going to work on themselves.
Well,
I think that's important. I know that sounds like tough love, but that's the way I see things.
well, that's the core of restorative justice, right? That like the solution has to come in part from the recovery of the person that committed the initial crime, right? Yeah, that's excellent.
And I think one thing that Richard is speaking to is that a lot of times courts, the core of this is accountability, but it's accountability that's also paired with the kind of equality that can make it work, right? Courts are generally top-down endeavors. You have a judge making a decision that's binding on everybody, and then it happens, and then this person goes to prison. Restorative justice is different than that because the accountability is shared, right? And it's incredibly important for the offender, the person who committed the offense, to take responsibility and to be accountable for what they did. But the community also assumes accountability,
yes,
too. So in that way, it is much more of an equal effort among the parties to try to get to the right solution than it is in the normal courtroom where you have a unilateral decision being made by a judge.
So that's a good segue into unilateral decisions that have gone wrong. So as we know, people can be unjustly convicted, by our courts, when, in our traditional system. Do you guys have a sense of, is this a big problem, a rare occurrence? Zeke, I know that your firm has done some work, trying to, with your criminal justice reform program, trying to get unjustly convicted persons, out of their sentences. How often does this happen? Here, maybe focus, here or just overall,
Far more often than it should. After George Floyd was murdered last year, you guys probably saw all these companies coming out, the commercials, everybody's all of a sudden committed to racial justice, and I think it was really important for companies and law firms to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. I've done a lot of this work. I've done habeas work. I've done juvenile life without parole work. I've done expungement work. And we were able to formalize this at Reed Smith by creating a permanent firm-wide criminal justice reform pro bono program. And that grew out of the work that I did on one case that came to us through a nonprofit organization that was started by two rappers, JayZ and Meek that advocates for nationwide criminal justice reform. And it involved a man who a couple of years ago had been charged with assault, and he had no previous criminal record, and he disputed the circumstances. So unlike a lot of criminal defendants, he decided to take the case to trial. And right before the jury was about to deliberate, the prosecutor approached him, and they came to a deal whereby if he would plead guilty to assault, the prosecutor would advocate for him to get a probationary sentence. So what do you think he did? He took the deal, he went home to his family. 2 years later, the prosecutor hauled him back into court saying that he was violating the terms of his probation. The only problem was that his probation officer never bothered to show up to the hearing. So there was no admissible evidence that he was violating the terms of his probation. That didn't stop the judge from not only revoking his probation, but giving him 5 to 10 years in state prison. All right. So he sat in prison for 3 years before we got the case, and we came on and we filed our habeas motions, and we had a series of hearings in front of a new judge, and we put hundreds of hours into this case. And when it was the prosecution's turn to respond, they shrugged their shoulders and said, you know what? We're not even going to file a response. You guys are right. And we had this incredible moment where we knew we had just won our case, but we were thinking, if we're right, then why has this man been sitting in prison for 3 years? We literally walked this guy out of prison and sent him home to his family in Pittsburgh, knowing all the while that he would never get those 3 years of his life back, right? So we talk about restorative justice. We talk about alternatives to punitive sentencing. These are the kind of cases where it matters. When you have people who don't have criminal records, first-time offenders, juveniles, people that we can reach through the restorative justice process by putting in place support from community and social service providers and the court system. And I'm sincerely hopeful that we can do that, in the coming years, especially with 9 vacancies open on the Court of Common Pleas this spring.
So you mentioned the word habeas, and we often, people say, oh, file appeal, things like that. So when somebody, walks out of a criminal proceeding, and they, think the conviction's wrong or the sentence is wrong. I mean, there's different levels of wrong. Conviction's wrong, sentence is wrong. If they think, let's say just the sentence is wrong. I know there's, very specific, levels of it could be like length correct is wrong, or, what tools are available, to defendants at, kind of the various stages for relief.
The answer is that it depends. And it depends what they're trying to contest. So on the one hand, if you're contesting the procedural or substantive unreasonableness of a sentence, that can be a direct appeal. If you're coming out of the Court of Common Pleas, that would go up to the Pennsylvania Superior Court. On the other hand, if you are dealing with a legal error like the one that was made in my case, they actually said the reason that it had to be a habeas case, or here it's called post-conviction relief case, was because it was my client's attorney's fault for not objecting to the hearsay testimony that was entered by someone else other than the probation officer. And so in that case, you cannot directly appeal that kind of case. You have to take an ineffective assistance of counsel claim through post-conviction relief. But it's problematic because there are all of these things like time bars, right? If somebody doesn't file a post-conviction relief motion within 1 year of the final determination of sentence, they are basically out of luck. And I can't tell you how worried we were about that in this case. It just so happened that he filed one 8 months after his final sentence. It was the luckiest possible break we could get in our case. If he hadn't done that, he'd be sitting in prison right now.
And he probably did that on advice of someone in prison, right? Not on the advice of anybody willing to help him, right?
A pro se, uncounseled motion that he hand wrote himself was enough to preserve his rights on post-conviction relief.
Yeah, it shouldn't be by sheer luck that you know your rights and the deadlines.
But, that's the education that a guy, man or woman, when they get behind the walls, that they should take up. I mean, that's one of the first things that I tell some of the young people that I deal with, go to the law clinic, talk to some of them lawyers, the jailhouse lawyers that's there, understand it. And I'm really impressed with your firm, Zeke, that they would go to those lengths, because they, the overabundance of men and women that are in prison don't have that kind of support, that they have to go pro se. You know,
Yeah, it was an amazing opportunity taking the case, Richard, but how many people are caught up like this? You know?
yes, I know.
Well, and that's what, so with the, people caught up like that, I would think that various areas in our communities, such as heavily policed communities, might have less faith in our judicial system. Because there's, higher arrests, and they're obviously getting higher cash bail. Heavily policed areas in our community are, typically they're disproportionately given higher cash bail, or minority communities and minorities are typically given higher cash bails, especially in Pittsburgh. So I would think that, probably they have, less faith in our judicial system, given these disproportionate statistics. Is there a way that we can help change that? Or the judicial new judges and magistrates can help change that?
I think the environment is calling for that. But again, I had to emphasize how much when I was away, guys forced me to go to the law clinic. Going down there, read this case and then, do the different things that. I think my generation was a little bit more progressive. I think the generation right now, not to say they're not progressive, but the ones that are involved in the criminal justice system, it seems like to some degree they've given up. They've given up and they taking whatever comes with it and not fighting the way that they should. I think it's a mindset. And I clearly think that a judge and judges always remind people what their rights are, to appeal and stuff like that. Is people have to get more, I'm putting the onus on folks, not just the system. If we wanted to change, we have to do something about it.
Yeah, I think you're right, Richard. And I also think that, for people to have faith in the system needs to treat the participants with some dignity. And make them all feel like they've been heard and had their day in court, right? Not just the witnesses, not just the victims, but the offenders and the participants and the juveniles feel like they've been heard, and that the system sees them as people and not just as files or as docket sheets, right? It's hard to trust a system that looks at you as a case number, and we need to, and we have an opportunity this spring to put some men and women on the benches who see, offenders as human beings, as our neighbors, as our family members.
And I think that's why there's projects like the Innocent Project that have been created, for those instances where men and women have been convicted or wrongly charged. The whole nation is talking about police reform right now, all over the country. We can think about the different police that set people up, gave them cases, that does happen. But the more laws and folks that's on the bench can see through some of the things that, some folks who aren't really committed to being law enforcement people just want to just build up their cases, that a judge can see through that. I think a judge has to be able to be open and look at both on all sides of what cases that they get in front of them, and be able to make a good decision on whether a person goes to jail or do they need the kind of help to keep them out of jail, or sometimes prison is a way to help somebody.
Mhm.
You know, so all those things. I know I sound kind of contradictory, but you know,
This system is not as black and white as the statutes and the procedures would lead us to believe that it is, right? Like, you know, good justice sometimes exists in the gray areas, especially reformative justice, maybe.
Yeah, and so this, this might seem like an obvious question, but it's probably worth discussing, especially following kind of coming on the tail end of a discussion about habeas and appeals. But why is it important for our courts to be fair to defendants, but also be willing, if it comes up that courts recognize that there has been a mistake, that they be willing to acknowledge that and investigate that, so that we can show fairness to defendants during the process.
I remember, so I had the opportunity to work for an amazing federal judge in New York City. She was a federal trial court judge. And I remember when she would do sentencings, she would just spend hours and hours poring over documents and pre-sentence reports. And it's incumbent on judges who make some of the most important decisions that affect people's lives to try to get to know those individuals as best they can in the time that they have. Mm-hmm. To the extent that judges can know both individuals and the communities that they come from, people's backgrounds, the harms that people's offenses created. Only then, on a case-by-case, individual by individual circumstance that emphasizes the humanity of people that are caught up in the court system, can we actually get to the point where judges are making the right decisions that will further the ends of justice? I really think that.
Yeah,
I really think yeah.
Go ahead and finish your thought.
No, I just think that judges need to be hardworking. They need to put in the time. They need to know communities. They need to know the individuals. And they really need to make decisions based on an intimate understanding of, communities, the diverse communities we have in Allegheny County, or in your case, Hilary, places like Mount Lebanon and Dormont. You've got to know those communities.
Right. Yeah, you got to know that it's not, the average white middle-class suburban community everybody assumes it is. We have lots of immigrants, people of color, people of all sorts of different socioeconomic status and education. And, I think that a multi-town district, the residents all ought to expect the same treatment regardless of what their zip code is. And sometimes that's not the case. And it should be. No matter where we come from, we ought to expect fairness and dignity and equitable treatment from the courts.
So you want to know something that is crazy? For years, I have said the hardest jobs in America were being a police officer or a public school teacher. I'm adding the third person to that, judges as well. Because yes, they make decisions on people's lives, that could impact their lives. I didn't realize it until I really started having this conversation with y'all.
Yeah, and appreciate it. Hilary, to go back to your question, I think that as it relates to wrongful convictions, it sounds a little Pollyanna, but one guilty person that goes free is better than an innocent person in prison for 25 years, right? And the system for far too long has looked at convictions as a win. And prosecutors look at their convictions as their success rate and as justification for them having done a good job. And I think justice ought to have a goal of getting to the right decision. And that's not always a conviction.
So can I ask the two of you a question? Because I'm sorry, kind of putting you on the spot though too.
That's what we signed up for, Richard.
Yeah, we did. We did sign up for
Okay.
that.
So I'm working with a young man. This is his third time that he was arrested. First one was a drug conviction. The second one was aggravated assault. Now he's arrested for a drug conviction, and it's with the feds. And they put the career criminal on him. You know, so where he should be, he would have been getting maybe 5 years, right?
Mhm.
He may get 22 years because, you know, I'm doing everything in my power to help this young man. He got 2 kids that he wasn't there when they were born, and it's man, it's keeping me up at night. You know,
Yeah.
but now, so a judge has to go by those guidelines that they have.
Mhm.
Fortunately not.
Okay.
I think it was 2005, a Supreme Court case was decided called United States versus Booker, which decided that federal trial judges, in this case, I assume you're in front of a U.S. District Court judge.
Yes.
In the Western District of Pennsylvania, they do not have to apply mandatory sentencing guidelines for things like armed career criminals or the federal 3 strikes. But here's the problem, Richard, okay? When you look at a federal sentencing guideline matrix, okay? And judges look at this, and prosecutors look at this, and defense attorneys look at this. They have all these categories, all right? And there's category 1 through category 6. When you get that third, either drug offense or violent crime offense, and they can be a combination, you go to category 6, right? Yes. And category 6 is very different than category 1 or category 2.
Right.
But this is why judges are so important. Because the judge, I don't know enough about his circumstance to be able to say, but the judge should be able to take his circumstances into account and take your recommendation into account and take the community's recommendation into account in deciding what kind of a sentence he actually gets. Because federal trial judges no longer have their hands tied in the way that they did 15 or 20 years ago. But still, starting off from category 6, it's no joke.
Yes.
No joke.
Yes. That's good to know. Thank you so much. I'm learning. I'm still learning, Elaine. I'm still learning.
You said you could make it concrete, so you just made it real concrete.
All right. Well, that I don't see any questions in the question and answer or on Facebook. So that is the end of our discussion portion. So this is where I get to act a little bit like a showman. So this is where we go through what you guys have coming up this week, because we are an advocacy group. So we like to help support the candidates, and also Richard, if you have anything. So, you know, I will start with you, Richard. If you have any of the organizations you are involved with, you can let us know, you know, how we can support you, and then I'll start with the candidates. So, you know, More and Grassroots Justice, you know, want to support you. That's why you're here. So let us know, you know, what you have coming up.
I do have my next homicide review is coming up next Tuesday. I will send you the link where we have folks from the different communities, law enforcement, social workers, mental health workers, and some community residents come to that. And we discuss some of the cases, and discussing those cases, you know, one of the things that I do is, or that we do, is that we try, if there's any children that the person who was killed is left behind, we try to get the family services so that they can overcome their loss, to help them overcome their loss. And it's a way that I use to get to the bottom of some of the different issues that are going on in the streets. So I think it's an interesting thing. Thank you. And I want to thank the two of you. I mean, yeah, y'all great.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was a pleasure to join you tonight. I'll go next so Hilary doesn't have to pick which one of us. My team is canvassing this every night, and this coming weekend, we're still figuring out launch location for Saturday. But we will be out on the doors spreading the word about my candidacy and trying to get voters to fill in their mail-in ballots or show up at the polls on May 18th. And we have a candidate meet and greet on Sunday, May 2nd at 4 p.m. And there's a Facebook event set up for that, co-hosted currently by Val Fleischer and Kate Abel and some other extraordinarily fabulous people, presumably coming on board. And on Monday night, I'm participating in a candidate forum with the other candidates for my race run by the Abolitionist Law Center. I am not certain whether that's running live or will be aired after taping, but that will be showing up at some point soon.
Great. Yeah, thank both of you guys, Hilary and Elaine for organizing, Hilary and Richard for presenting with me. One of the best conversations I've gotten to have during the course of this campaign trail, and I really appreciate you guys. We've got some good stuff coming up. Tomorrow, Jan McManus and Tony Buba are having a candidate coffee for me, which should be a lot of fun. I'm going on a political podcast called Just a Couple Kids, which is run by Ryan Herbinko and Tony Griffith on Wednesday. So hopefully that'll be dropping soon thereafter. And then we've got the United Black Book Clubs of Pittsburgh event on Friday night at 6:30, which should be great. This weekend, we're back to canvassing. I've been going out every day, but we've got a joint East End canvas for judicial reform with Tiffany Sizemore, Giuseppe Roselli, Chelsea Wagner, and myself at 10 a.m. at Bakery Square on Sunday, May 2nd. So that should be a lot of fun, and would love to see you guys out there on the trail.
Great. And I have put into there, for the listeners that are on the Facebook Live, and I believe that then shows up on the video, their websites are in the Facebook Live. These candidates can't ask, but I certainly can ask. You can go to their websites, electhillary.com and zekeforjudge.com, and donate to these candidates. Although I don't believe Hilary will be doing commercials, I know Zeke will likely be doing commercials, so you can see him for the Common Pleas Court, and Hilary certainly needs money for mailers, so these candidates can use all of your financial support to help them get elected. We certainly need judges and magistrates who are willing to put restorative justice practices into effect once elected, so your help would be much appreciated. And thank you, Richard, for joining our panel. We always enjoy having a third non-candidate panelist on. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Next week, super exciting panel. We have Judge Mick Pappas. We also then have candidate Jerry Dickinson, who has announced. And then we have Hilary Taylor will be back. And then Daniel Vitek. And I think that is it. Yeah, to talk about landlords, tenants, and real estate. So it'll be a really great panel next Monday at 7 o'clock, same time. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.